Um, Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Um, it's morning time here, 9:30 in the morning, and it's afternoon there. So good afternoon to all of you. The subject of my presentation today is on peace and education in normative Islamic perspective and contemporary considerations. Prior to addressing the subject of peace education in the context of Islam, it is important to reflect on what is denoted by peace and education in the Quran and significant ahadith or traditions of Prophet Muhammad. My analysis and understanding of these two concepts is as follows. I will first talk about the normative Islamic view of peace. Peace, or salam, is often defined negatively as absence of war or conflict. But as pointed out by Muhammad Asad, the distinguished translator and exegete of the Quran, the term salam denotes inner peace, soundness, and security from evil of any kind, both physical and spiritual, and inner contentment. It is a positive state of safety when one is free from anxiety or fear, which characterizes both Islam, which means self surrender to God, and Iman, which is true faith in God. Reference is made to it directly or indirectly on every page of the Quran through the many derivatives of the roots SLM and AMN, from which the terms Islam and Iman are derived. Peace is an integral part not only um, of the terms used for a believer, namely Muslim, it means one who professes Islam, and Momin, one who possesses Iman, but also of God's names, As-Salam and Al-Momin, mentioned in the Quran, for instance in Surah 59, Al-Hashr, verse 23. He is Allah, beside whom there is no God, the King, the Holy, the author of peace, As-Salam, the guarantor of security, Al-Momin, guardian over all the mighty, the supreme, the possessor of greatness. In Surah 10, Yunus, verse 25, we are told, and know that God invites human beings unto the abode of peace. The abode of peace is Darus Salam, and guides him that wills to be guided onto a straight way. The Quran promises the reward of peace to those who live in accordance with God's will, as for instance in the following passages. This is Surah 5, Al-Ma'idah, verses 15 and 16. Now there has come unto you from God a light and a clear divine writ, through which God shows unto all that seek his goodly acceptance the paths leading to peace, salam, and by his grace brings them out of the depths of darkness into the light and guides them onto a straight way. Surah 6, Al-An'am, verses 126 and 127 reads, clearly indeed have we provided unto these messages unto people who are willing to take them to heart. There shall be an abode of peace, Dar es Salam, with their sustainer, and he shall be near unto him in result of what they have been doing. In an important passage, the Quran points out what a believer must do to attain peace in the hereafter. But that is also the way of attaining peace here and now. This is from Surah 13, Arad, verses 90 to 24. Can then he who knows that whatever has been bestowed from on high upon thee by thy sustainer is the truth, be deemed equal to one who is blind? Only they who are endowed with insight keep this in mind. they who are true to their covenant and who keep together what God has bidden to be joined, and stand in awe of their sustainer and fear the most evil reckoning, which awaits such as do not respond to God and who are patient in adversity out of a longing for their sustainer's countenance, and, and are constant in prayer and spend on others secretly and openly out of what we provide for them as sustenance, and who repel all evil. It is these that shall find the fulfillment in the hereafter, gardens of perpetual bliss, which they shall enter together with the righteous from among their parents, their spouses, and their offspring. And the angels will come unto them from every gate and will say, Peace unto you, Salamu alaikum, because you have persevered. How excellent this fulfillment in the hereafter. In other words, peace on earth, which is a precondition of peace in heaven, is the result of living in accordance with God's will and pleasure. Here it is important to note that Islam conceives of God as Rabbul Alameen, the creator and sustainer of all peoples and universes, whose purpose in creating is stated in Surah 51, At-Tariyat, verse 56. It reads, I have not created the invisible beings and human beings to any end other than they may worship me. Explaining this verse, Muhammad Asad says that the innermost purpose of the creation of all rational beings is their cognition of the existence of God, and hence their conscious willingness to conform their own existence to whatever they may perceive of His will and plan. And it is this twofold concept of cognition and willingness that gives the deepest meaning to what God describes to what the Quran describes as worship or ibadah. Ibadah, which literally means service, refers to the fulfillment of the rights of God, Haqooq Allah, and the rights of God's servants, namely human beings, Haqooqul Ibad. The Quran considers these two kinds of rights to be inseparable, as indicated by the constant conjunction of salat, which is signifying remembrance of and devotion to God, and zakat, which is signifying the sharing of one's possessions with those in need. In fact, as Surah 107 Al-Ma'un shows, the Quran is severe in its criticism of those who offer their prayers to God but are deficient in performing acts of kindness to those in need. The surah reads, Hast thou ever considered the kind of person who gives the lie to all moral law? Behold, it is this kind of person who thrusts the orphan away and feels no urge to feed the needy. Woe then unto those praying ones whose hearts from their prayer are remote, those who want only to be seen and praised and withal deny all assistance to their fellow beings. In Quranic terms, then, peace can come to prevail in any human society only when human beings, conscious of their duty to God, fulfill their duty to other human beings. In fulfilling this duty, they honor the fundamental rights of all other people, including particularly those who are marginalized and vulnerable to discrimination. These fundamental rights are those that all human beings ought to possess because they are rooted so deeply in our humanness that their denial or violation is tantamount to negation or degradation of that which makes us human. These rights came into existence when we did. They were created as we were by God in order that our human potential could be actualized. These rights not only provide us with an opportunity to develop all our inner resources, but they also hold before us as a vision of what God would like us to be. Rights given by God, uh, rights given by God cannot be abolished by any human authority. The Quran constantly affirms that everything that God does is for a just purpose. Among the fundamental rights which are considered a prerequisite for peace in any society, the following are of critical significance. The right to life. The sanctity and absolute value of human life is upheld by the Quran, which mandates, and do not take any human being's life, the life which God has declared to be sacred, otherwise than in the pursuit of justice. This he has enjoined upon you so that you might use your reason. This is Surah 6, verse 115. Um, in another surah, which is Surah 5, verse 35, it says, "We ordained unto the children of Israel that if anyone slays a human being, unless it be punishment for murder or for spreading corruption on earth, it shall be as though he had slain all humankind. Whereas if anyone saves a life, it shall be as though he has saved the lives of all humankind." Right to respect. In Surah 17, verse 70, the Quran says, "Now indeed we have conferred dignity on the children of Adam." This means the entire human race. Human beings are deemed worthy of respect because they have been created in the best conformation, Surah 95, verse 4, and possess the faculty of reason which distinguishes them from other creatures and enables them to accept the trust of freedom of will which no other creature is willing to accept. Surah 33, verse 72. Human beings can acquire knowledge of good and evil and strive to do the good and to avoid the evil. Thus, they have the potential to be gods, what the Quran calls Khalifa, vicegerents on earth. On account of the promise that is contained in being human, the humanity of all human beings is to be respected and considered an end in itself. The third right I want to mention in this context is the right to justice, on which the Quran puts tremendous emphasis. O you who have attained to faith, be ever steadfast in upholding equity, bearing witness to the truth for the sake of God, even though it be against your own selves or your parents or kinsfolk, whether the person concerned be rich or poor. God's claim takes precedence over the claims of either of them. Do not then follow your own desires, lest ye swerve from justice. For if you distort the truth or refuse to testify, behold, God is indeed aware of all that you do. Surah 5, verse 8 says, O you who have attained to faith, be ever steadfast in your devotion to God, bearing witness to the truth in all equity, and never let hatred of anyone lead you into the sin of deviating from the truth. Be just. This is closest to being God conscious, and remain conscious of God. Verily, God is aware of all that you do. In the context of justice, the Quran uses two concepts, adl and Hassan. Adl means equality in the sight of law. It's symbolized by a scale which is evenly balanced. And Hassan is another form of justice. One could call it compassionate justice. And the Quran says that justice has to be done particularly to those people, those individuals who are vulnerable to discrimination or who have some kind of special needs. While enjoining justice towards all, the Quran maintains the recognition of individual merit is also a fundamental right. It teaches that merit is not determined by lineage, sex, wealth, religion, but by righteousness or taqwa, which consists not only of right belief, which is iman, but also just action, which is amal, as pointed out in the following verse. True piety does not consist in turning your faces toward the east or the west, but truly pious is he who believes in God and the last day and the angels and the revelation and the prophets, and spends his substance, however much he himself may cherish it, upon the near of kin, and the orphans, and the needy, and the wayfarer, and the beggars, and for the freeing of human beings from bondage, and is constant in prayer, and renders the purifying dues, and truly pious are they who keep their promises whenever they promise, and are patient in misfortune and hardship, and in time of peril, it is they who have proved themselves true, and it is they who are conscious of God. Surah 495 testifies to the higher merit of those who strive harder for the cause of God. It says, such of the believers as remain passive, other than the disabled, cannot be deemed equal to those who strive in God's cause with their possessions and their lives. God has exalted those who strive hard with their possessions and their lives far above those who remain passive. Although God has promised the ultimate good unto all believers, yet has God exalted those who strive hard above those who remain passive by promising them a mighty reward. Okay. Means restoring the balance by making up a loss or deficiency. In order to understand this concept, it is necessary to understand the nature of the ideal community or ummah envisaged by the Quran. The word ummah comes from the root which means mother. The symbols of a motherly love and compassion are also linked to the two most beloved attributes of God, namely Rahman and Rahim, both of them derived from the root RHM or womb. The ideal ummah cares about all its members, just as an ideal mother cares about all her children, knowing that not all are equal and that each has special needs. Hassan shows the Quran's sympathy for the downtrodden, oppressed, and vulnerable classes of human beings, such as women, slaves, orphans, the poor, the infirm, minorities, etc. The next right I want to mention is the right to freedom. Again, extremely important in the Quran. A large part of the Quran's concern is to free human beings from the chains that bind them. Traditionalism, authoritarianism, religious, political, economic, tribalism, racism, sexism, and slavery. God alone is completely free and not subject to any constraints. The human condition necessitates that limits be set to what human beings may or may not do, so that liberty may not degenerate into license. The Quran has clearly stated that judgment as to what is right and what is wrong rests with God alone. This tells the Muslims that only God is the final arbiter of human freedom of will and action. Although it's beyond the scope of my presentation to mention all the freedoms granted by the Quran. I want to mention one that is very important in the context of our discussion. It is in Surah 2, verse 256, which says, "There shall be no coercion in religion, or there shall be no coercion in matters of faith." The same is implied in Surah 18, verse 29. It says, "The truth has now come from your sustainer. Let him who wants to believe, believe, and let him who wills to reject it, reject it." It is noteworthy that in the matter of religious freedom, the Quran is liberal to an amazing degree. Not only does it state clearly that the mission of Prophet Muhammad and Muslims, non-Muslims, consists of a faithful transmission of the message of God and the Prophet, that they ought not to feel responsible for the religious and moral choices made by other Muslims or non-Muslims after they have received the message of God. The Quran also makes it clear that plurality of religions as well as dialogue amongst religions is part of God's plan for humanity. This verse has already been referred to before today. It is Surah 49, verse 13. "O humankind, behold, we have created you out of a male and a female, and have made you into nations and tribes, so that you might come to know one another. Verily, verily, the noblest of you in the sight of God is the one who is most deeply conscious of God. In this context, Surah 2, verse 62, which is repeated in Surah 5, verse 69, is particularly important. Verily, those who have attained to faith in this divine writ, as well as those who follow the Jewish faith and the Christians and the Sabaeans, all who believe in God and the last day and do righteous deeds, shall have their reward with their sustainer, and no fear need they have, nor shall they grieve. The Quran exhorts Muslims to respect the religious sensibilities even of those who worship deities other than God. Surah 6, verse 108 says, "Do not revile those beings whom they invoke instead of God, lest they revile God out of spite and in ignorance, for goodly have we made their own doings to them." Moving on, my paper actually has a lot more citations, but I have to honor the time limit, so I am just reading some of them. Two other rights I want to mention are the right to sustenance and the right to work. As pointed out by Surah 11, verse 6, every living creature depends for its sustenance upon God. A cardinal concept in the Quran, which underlies the socio-economic political system of Islam, is that the ownership of everything belongs not to any person but to God. Every creature has the right to partake of what belongs to God, who is the universal creator and sustainer. This means that every human being, woman as well as man, has the right to a means of living. It also means that those who hold political and economic power do not have the right to deprive others of the basic necessities of life by misappropriating or misusing resources that have been created by God for the benefit of humanity in general. Right to work means that it is fundamental Quranic teaching that every man or woman has the right to work, whether the work consists of gainful employment or voluntary service. The fruits of labor belong to the one who has worked for them, regardless of whether it is a man or a woman. Surah 4, verse 32 says, men shall have the benefit from what they earn, and women shall have a benefit from what they earn. It is essential in the context of human rights in Islam to mention that there is more Quranic legislation pertaining to the regulation of man-woman relationships than on any other subject. The Quran is fully cognizant of the fact that women have been amongst the most exploited and oppressed groups in the world, and aims in multifarious ways to establish their equality with men and secure justice for them in domestic and public matters. An idea of central importance implicit in many Quranic teachings is that if human beings can learn to order their homes justly and recognize the rights of all within its jurisdiction, then they can also order society and the world at large justly. So what this part of my presentation is arguing is that according to the teachings of the Quran, justice is a prerequisite for peace. Without the elimination of inequities, inequalities, and injustices that pervade the personal and collective lives of human beings, it is not possible to talk about Islam, peace in Islamic terms. One second, please. I turn now to education, the second part of my presentation. The first was trying to explain the many ways in which the Quran refers to peace. I would like now to talk about education. Education is the process of imparting or acquiring knowledge, and it is necessary to understand that this normative Islamic view of knowledge to understand what education denotes in any particular context. The primary sources of Islam put fundamental stress on the importance of acquiring knowledge. This is clear from many Quranic passages and prophetic hadith. It is important to note, for instance, that the Quran refers 157 times to God as Al-Alim, one who has knowledge. The very first verse of the Quran revealed to Prophet Muhammad links the human ability to read, to know, and to write. This is Surah 96, verses 1 to 4. Read in the name of the sustainer who has created human beings out of a germ cell. Read, for thy sustainer is the most bountiful, one who has taught human beings the use of the pen, taught humankind what he did not know. So in this very first verse, there is reference to reading and creating and writing. Surah 4 verse 113 points out that God granted knowledge to Prophet Muhammad both by means of divine revelation, which is the Quran, and wisdom, which is hikmah, which is the knowledge of the innate reality of things. Prophet Muhammad had been sent by God to convey unto you our messages and to cause you to grow in purity and to impart unto you revelation and wisdom and to teach you that which you did not know. He is an imparter of knowledge to others. The Quran has indicated in a number of passages that those who have knowledge can comprehend the nature of God and the truth of all revelation sent to Prophet Muhammad and how it can be a guide to those who seek the nearness of God. For instance, there are many verses in this context. I will just read one of them. Nay, but this divine writ consists of messages clear to the hearts of all who are gifted with innate knowledge. Ilm, the word ilm occurs in these many passages. The term ilm in the above citations has the connotation of intuitive spiritual perception. The Quran emphasizes the importance of knowledge in many ways. It says, for instance, can they who know and those who do not know be deemed equal? There are also many prophetic hadiths which are on the importance of knowledge, seeking of knowledge, very highly commended in these authentic traditions of the Prophet. There is a lot of historical evidence that shows that the Prophet Muhammad considered the education of his community a matter of high priority. As Goldziher has pointed out, Muhammad himself, partly it may be on utilitarian grounds, attached great importance to the acquisition of the most indispensable elements of knowledge, may be inferred from the condition on which he released prisoners of war after his victory at Badr, the Battle of Badr, 624 AD. The Prophet employed several Quraysh captives to teach the boys at Medina to write, and this service counted as their ransom. There are 5 sources of knowledge which the poet philosopher Iqbal, outstanding Muslim thinker, reformist, modernist thinker, identifies 5 sources of knowledge. The revelation, which is knowledge that is given directly by God, in this case the Quran. Sense perception, which is knowledge gained through the senses. Reason, which is the discursive faculty, logical understanding by means of which human beings acquire both theoretical and empirical knowledge. Intuition, which is a mode of knowledge in which a direct revelation is made to the mind, which is similar to direct revelation made to the eye, when it sees a physical object. And history, the last source is history, was regarded as a source of knowledge and inspiration by Iqbal, who referred to the Quranic view as follows. He says, history in the language of the Quran is the days of God. It is one of the most essential teachings of the Quran that nations are collectively judged and suffer for their misdeeds here and now. In order to establish this proposition, the Quran constantly cites historical instances and urges upon the reader to reflect on the past and present experience of mankind. I come to the summation of my argument now. In the foregoing narrative, I have examined what I understand to be normative Islamic view of peace and education. Both terms or concepts are complex and denote a worldview. In the first part of my presentation, I have drawn attention to what is meant by peace in Quranic terms and how it can come into existence. In order to enter Darussalam, to which we are invited by God, believers must develop in themselves physical, psychological, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual attributes to which the Quran refers repeatedly. The inculcation of these attributes will enable a Muslim, one who professes Islam, to become a mu'min, one who possesses Iman. A mu'min is committed to fulfilling Haqooq Allah, rights of God, and Haqooq al-Ibad under all circumstances. Prophet Muhammad sought to establish a model society in which the right of all people was recognized and honored. In today's complicated world, it may not be possible to replicate the Prophet's example with exactitude. But one thing is clear. According to normative Islam, based on the teachings of the Quran and the lived experience of Prophet Muhammad, justice remains a precondition for peace. In the second part of my presentation, I have stated the normative Islamic view of education, which is a process of acquiring or imparting knowledge. Both the Quran and the Prophet attach the highest importance to it. God is referred as Al-Alim 157 times, as I have stated before. And the inculcating of this divine attribute in themselves ought to be the religious duty of all Muslims. Like peace, knowledge is understood as a prerequisite for any society that aspires to be Islamic. It has multiple sources which are recognized and affirmed by normative Islamic teachings. In the light of what I have said about the normative Islamic view of peace and education, what does peace education mean to me? There is no easy or simple answer to this question. I do not see peace education only or primarily as an academic project aiming to teach students how to promote peace in areas of conflict. As I have made clear at the onset of this presentation, peace is not simply an absence of war or an instrument of conflict resolution. To me, peace and education are integral and central to the Islamic worldview. Both are rooted in self-surrender to God, Islam, and both entail ongoing striving, jihad, to achieve wholeness in one's individual life, one's relationship to other creations of God, including nature, which is so, and one's society or state. Given the fragmented state of the present-day Muslim Ummah, which is so lamentably lacking in both peace and education, as I have described them, I believe that Muslims, especially young Muslims, should engage in a jihad for justice and knowledge. This jihad is necessary if the Muslim Ummah is to emerge from darkness into light. Living in the West or other regions where Islamophobia is rampant and escalating, those Muslims who are open to dialogue with people of other faith, mainly Christians and Jews, are often drawn to peace education as a means of mitigating bigotry and hatred toward their communities. I know this because I have been one such Muslim who has been involved in interreligious dialogue with Christians and Jews for more than 4 decades. I have a lifelong commitment to engaging in interreligious and intercultural dialogue, which I regard as Quranic injunction, but I have come to believe that the pursuit of both peace and knowledge, or peace and education across religious and cultural divides, should be a two-way process. In summation, I want to urge young Muslims to internalize the teachings of the Quran and Prophet Muhammad regarding peace, education, and knowledge, and put them into practice in their own lives and in their communities. I would like to encourage open-hearted and open-minded non-Muslims who want to engage in a dialogue with Muslims to review the long history of the negative imaging of Islam and its prophets, as well as the history of Spain in the Middle Ages when Muslims, Christians, and Jews interacted with each other in a spirit of uh, coexistence. It is important for Muslims as well as non-Muslims to know the history of their past interaction. For as George Santayana has wisely observed, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Thank you.